Klaus would never know about the order to shoot down his plane. As it happened, the order had to pass over the desk of a member of the conspiracy. Suspecting that this was connected to the coup, he did not send it on. The squadron of fighters ordered to attack the returning rebel was never scrambled. Unaware of his danger, Klaus, convinced that Hitler was dead, expected the coup to be in full swing by the time he reached the capital. If things went according to plan, officers across the Reich would have assumed executive power and many of the Nazi leaders would be under lock and key. But the coup needed a dynamic leader at its nerve centre. The men in position, though brave and intelligent, lacked the force of will to drive events forward. At about 4 p.m, Klaus and Haften landed safely. Haften telephoned the Bendler block immediately and gave the code word
Fertig.
finished, indicating that Hitler had been assassinated. When told that the Valkyrie orders hadn't gone out, Klaus came on the line and ordered them to be sent immediately. Not wanting to wait a moment longer, Merz signed the first Valkyrie order on his own authority and sent it for urgent dispatch. Once he had issued the order, Merz called senior officers together and announced that the Führer had been assassinated and key Nazi figures were attempting to assume control. It was necessary for the army to act. Field Marshal Witzleben had been appointed the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. Colonel General Beck had assumed overall command of the Reich. Merz ordered the code word Valkyrie Stage 2 transmitted to all regions and to all the military establishments in Berlin. The code was immediately sent. Merz also ordered several officers to secure the building. Clattering down the stairs, they established armed guard posts on all the entrances. Meanwhile, Olbricht hurried off to see Fromm. The resistance had to hope the Home Army commander would fall into line. But they must press on, come what may. This is Treason, the remarkable and true story of Claus von Stauffenberg and the plot to assassinate Hitler. Episode 8. Insurrection. The commander of the Home Army knew nothing of what had occurred. He was surprised when Olbricht, clearly flustered, barged into the midst of a military conference in his office. Olbricht told Fromm he must inform him of something under 4 eyes. When the room was cleared, Olbricht pulled out the Valkyrie orders for Fromm's signature, announcing that the Führer had been assassinated. He had heard it from the Wolf's Lair. He asked Fromm to issue the code word to activate Valkyrie so that the army could seize executive power and prevent unrest. But Fromm was not going to be rushed into action without being sure of his ground. He decided to ring Keitel at the Wolf's Lair. What has happened at headquarters? Wild rumours are circulating in Berlin.
What is supposed to be the matter?
Keitel retorted. I just had a report that the Führer had been the victim of an assassination.
It is true that an attempt was made, but fortunately it has failed. The Führer is alive and only slightly injured. Where, by the way, is your Chief of Staff, Colonel Stauffenberg?
Colonel Stauffenberg has not yet returned to my office. After he replaced the receiver, Fromm looked at Olbricht. In the circumstances, he would do nothing for the moment. Olbricht went back to his office. Fromm won't sign, he told those gathered there. He was deflated and seemed inclined to do nothing more. Merz pointed out that he had already issued the orders and announced Valkyrie to the senior officers in the building. Olbricht could no longer stay out of this. At last he swung into action. He rang Paris and gave the code word launched, setting in motion the insurrection there. He also telephoned key conspirators in Berlin to ask them to take action. He rang Lieutenant General von Hauser, the military commandant of the city. Hauser carried out all the planned measures. Albrecht then rang Heldorf, the Berlin police chief, and summoned him to the Bendler block. "It's starting!" yelled Heldorf as he gathered his staff to head for the Home Army headquarters. Albrecht ordered the next wave of Valkyrie orders to be sent immediately to all military districts. There was nothing ambiguous about these orders. They were issued in the name of Field Marshal von Witzleben, and they amounted to the assumption of full political power by the army. Captain Klausing acted as Merz's duty officer. He took the order and sprinted along the corridor to the signals officer. He threw the message onto his table. The signals officer wondered why Klausing looked so worked up and then saw the first sentence. "The Führer, Adolf Hitler, is dead." Then he noticed that the message lacked any instructions for encryption. He ran after Klausing and asked whether he should not give the message the highest secrecy and priority gradings. Klausing bridled. Yes, please insert them." The reaction was natural enough. It would not do for the Gestapo or other Nazis to receive advance warning that the army would arrest them. But it was not intended by the conspirators. Although dispatch commenced immediately, the security grading meant that the message to each centre had to be separately typed and encrypted. The task would take hours instead of minutes. The conspirators had already lost over 3 hours, and that was about to be extended. At about 4:30 on the 20th of July 1944, the car bringing Claus and Vienna slammed to a halt in the courtyard of the Bendler block. The two men sprang out and raced for Klaus's office. "He is dead," Claus reported. There was an explosion inside the hut. No one survived. Albrecht told Claus that Fromm had refused to sign. The orders had been sent without Fromm's authority. As Fromm's chief of staff, Claus had authority to sign orders for his commander. Desperate to keep things moving quickly, he now signed the next Valkyrie order and sent it for immediate dispatch. The order directed seizure of all communications installations, including radio stations. It also ordered the arrest of senior Nazi and SS officials and immediate occupation of concentration camps. Guards were to be disarmed and confined to barracks. After a series of detailed orders, the message concluded, "In the exercise of executive power, no arbitrary acts of revenge will be tolerated. The people must be made aware of the difference from the arbitrary methods of their former rulers." Anyone reading this order would know that this was action aimed at changing the regime, not upholding it. The conspirators were out in the open. They were out in the open more than they knew. Although the plotters were still disrupting communications to and from the Wolf's Lair, some traffic could get through. When the order reached Keitel, the Nazi hierarchy appreciated what it meant at once. They were confronted with a coup. The one thing that gave them heart was the conspirators' disdain for ruthless methods. With the next Valkyrie orders sent, the resistance members turned their focus to Colonel General Fromm. They desperately needed him on side. He was the officer entrusted with Valkyrie. Not everyone would accept orders from his chief of staff or his replacement. It was time for Fromm to choose a side. Claus and Albrecht went to see Fromm in his office. Albrecht immediately informed the Colonel General that the Führer was indeed dead and that Claus could confirm this. "That is impossible," replied Fromm. "Keitel has assured me to the contrary." Claus countered strongly. "Field Marshal Keitel is lying through his teeth as usual. I myself saw Hitler's body carried out on a stretcher." Fromm then mused that someone in the Führer's entourage must have been involved. "I did it," Claus said. Then Olbricht dropped his own bombshell, telling Fromm that the code word for internal unrest had been issued to the commanding generals. Fromm sprang to his feet and pounded his fist on the desk. "That is rank insubordination. Who, in fact, gave the order?" Olbricht told him it was Merz. Fromm ordered Merz to be called, and when he entered, told Merz he was under arrest. Fromm told him to cancel the orders. Rather than cancel the orders, Merz sat down in the nearest chair. "Colonel General, you have just placed me under arrest. Therefore my freedom of movement is restricted." Fromm's anger was rising. Claus now spoke. "General Fromm, I myself detonated the bomb during the conference in Hitler's headquarters. No one who was in that room could be living." Fromm said, "The assassination has miscarried. I hope you have a pistol and know what to do with it in such a situation. You have no alternative but to shoot yourself." "I have no intention of shooting myself," replied Claus icily. He added that the assassination was not the object but merely the first step in a general insurrection. Olbricht now tried to inspire Fromm with the higher motives for their actions. "General Fromm, the moment for action has come. If we do not strike now, our country will be ruined forever." Fromm looked at him. "Does that mean that you too are involved in this coup d'etat, Olbricht?" Olbricht admitted he was. "You and Stauffenberg are under arrest too," said Fromm. But the coup leaders stood firm. Olbricht eyed Fromm and replied, "You are mistaken. It is we who are arresting you." Fromm leapt up and flailed with clenched fists. Haften and Kleist entered the room and drew their pistols. Kleist pressed his into Fromm's ample belly. Fromm subsided back into his chair. He said, "Under the circumstances, I consider myself relieved of my command." Claus ordered Fromm to be locked in his aide's room with the doors guarded. The disconsolate general asked for a flask of brandy. Claus agreed. Fromm shambled off into custody, clutching his bottle. With Fromm out of the picture, the conspirators placed Colonel General Erich Hoepner in command of the Home Army. A leading tank general, Hitler had dismissed him from service after he ordered his panzer armies to retreat in the first winter before Moscow. Now Hoepner donned his uniform, which he was forbidden to wear, and moved into Fromm's office. By late afternoon, the Wolfslayer had the second Valkyrie order. They knew that the Nazi regime confronted a full insurrection across all military districts. Himmler persuaded the Führer to appoint him Commander-in-Chief of the Home Army. He would replace Fromm, in whose name the Valkyrie order had been issued. As he signed the document Himmler had drawn up, Hitler railed, "Shoot anyone who resists, no matter who he is. The fate of the Third Reich is at stake. Be merciless." Himmler clicked his heels. "My Führer, you can rely on me." The Wolfslayer was close to the fighting in Russia, but a long way from the centres of power in the Reich. The Nazi leaders were now hours away from the places where the issue of control of the Reich would be determined. The conspirators were on location with a distinct advantage over their isolated opponents. Desperate to spread the word that Hitler had survived and was still in command, the Nazis sent a series of messages by teleprinter to locations throughout the Reich. What followed was a fantastic, long-distance duel of message and counter-message coming from the Wolfslayer and the Bendler block. From the Wolfslayer came a message asserting the Führer was in perfect health. It told all to ignore orders coming from Witzleben, Hoepner and Fromm, and that Himmler was now in charge of the Home Army. In response, Claus sent another message out, claiming the Wolfslayer message was incorrect. The Führer had indeed perished, and the Valkyrie orders should be carried out with immediate effect. Troops began to move as ordered. Most of the key officers were participants in the coup, and liaison officers from the Bendler block ensured that measures were taken as required. At last the mechanism of the coup was working, and the Nazis too far away to do anything. They might have been able to rely on the powerful SS units positioned close to Berlin, but these were taken completely by surprise. The SS had been preparing for years to deal with a coup, but on the 20th of July 1944 they remained uncertain and inactive for hours. Though the units were alerted quite early in the afternoon, no one told them what to do. The Valkyrie order that the Waffen-SS was to be incorporated into the army appears to have knocked some of the officers off balance. The SS forces remained confined to barracks. After he received the Valkyrie orders, General von Haase summoned Major Rehmer, battalion commander of the Grossdeutschland Guard Battalion. Haase told him that Hitler was dead and that the army was assuming plenary powers. He ordered Rehmer to take the Grossdeutschland Guard Battalion and secure the government quarter of the city. He told Rehmer that the police had been ordered to cooperate and assist. Rehmer assembled the troops and drove into the city. Rapidly, they deployed around the government quarter. Rehmer checked their dispositions, visiting all of the control posts. The conspirators had prepared measures both extensive and firm. The troops were ordered to establish comprehensive roadblocks. No one was to enter the area until the arrests were completed. By about 6 o'clock, the government quarter was completely cordoned off. The Gestapo officers in the city could only peer helplessly from the windows of their headquarters as Wehrmacht forces marched confidently past and cleared the public from the area. The Gestapo was confined in its own notorious prison. Also watching from his office window was Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister and the most senior Nazi in Berlin. Seeing the troops locking down the streets, he telephoned to Wolfslayer. Telephone lines to the propaganda ministry and to Goebbels' apartment had not been cut, and he got through. He was told the army was engaged in a coup. With troops everywhere and clearly in control of the streets around his apartment, things looked bleak for the propaganda minister. Goebbels went to a cupboard and took out 2 cyanide capsules. Back at the Bendler block, Colonel General Beck arrived. He was designated by the resistance as the new head of state. He was closely followed at about 5 o'clock by Police Chief Count Helldorf and his entourage, including the diplomat Hans Gisevius. They were shocked to see Klaus. They had expected to be called in the early stages of the coup, but his presence indicated that the bomb had exploded hours earlier. Albrecht spoke in an assured tone and told them that Hitler had been assassinated earlier in the day and the Wehrmacht had taken over direction of the government. A state of siege was being proclaimed and the Berlin police were to be subordinated directly to the high command of the armed forces. He instructed Helldorf to carry out the necessary measures. Helldorf hurried away. Just then an SS Oberführer arrived, clicked his heels and barked, "Heil Hitler!" He demanded to see Colonel Stauffenberg. He had been sent to invite Stauffenberg to a conference with the head of the Gestapo to explain his sudden departure from the Wolfslayer. Klaus genially introduced himself and invited the senior colonel into his office. There, he had waiting officers disarm and arrest the outraged SS envoy and his escort. He ordered them locked up. Klaus knew that the conspiracy had lost precious time. He was determined to make up for it. From Zossen and Cottbus, south of Berlin, to Krampnitz and Döberitz in the west, senior resistance members were contacted, brought up to speed and given their instructions. The Reserve Brigade in the southeast were to occupy the radio stations in the area. Tank battalions in the west began moving in formation past SS headquarters towards the city centre. At the infantry training school at Döberitz, to the west of Berlin, orders were to seize and occupy the Oranienburg concentration camps. However, the head of the school, a member of the resistance, was absent, and officers expressed uncertainty and did not move out to occupy the camps. At the Army Ordnance School on the southeastern outskirts of the city proper, orders were to occupy the castle Lustgarten, which controlled the eastern end of the main east-west thoroughfare in Berlin, Unter den Linden. But the companies lacked transport and attempts to obtain lorries were fruitless. The men marched off, several catching trams as they made their way north to their objective. In the signals room at the Bendler block, the signal staff pressed ahead as order after order was sent out, making ever more specific the shape of the new administration. One of the essential preconditions to a successful coup was the control of the radio stations. The conspirators had assigned troops to this task and had prepared a radio broadcast to the nation. At Radio Berlin, a heavily armed Wehrmacht contingent rapidly seized the building. They did not disarm the two SS sentries, but took up position beside them and ordered the manager, a committed Nazi, to cease broadcasting. The station manager put on a good show of disconnecting equipment, but transmission was at no stage interrupted. The important technical workings were in an underground bunker nearby. The troops were completely bamboozled. 2 senior resistance members were expected to arrive and deliver the new administration's first proclamation to the public. They were to be provided with an armed escort into Broadcasting House and merely awaited advice as to the appropriate moment. But the Wehrmacht troops at Radio Berlin failed to tell the Bendler block that they had taken charge of Broadcasting House. With no advice that the station was in their hands, and with continued transmission from Radio Berlin, the coup leaders were left to assume their troops did not control the radio transmitter. As a result, the appropriate moment never arrived, and the resistance took no advantage of their control of Berlin radio. Wehrmacht troops occupied several other broadcasting stations in Berlin. The story was the same in each of them. The building taken, but control of the technical business of broadcasting languished in the absence of qualified experts. Back at the Bendler block, resistance members in Paris phoned. Officers nearby hushed to hear. Everything had gone according to plan. All senior Nazis were under arrest. Sandbags were being piled up ready to shoot them if this became necessary. The army was in complete control in the west. The conspiracy had achieved all its aims. Paris was theirs. When the Valkyrie orders reached Vienna, Wehrmacht commanders invited the senior Gestapo, SS and party leaders to army headquarters. Although some were reluctant and suspicious, especially when they saw the guard in full battle kit, all were coaxed inside. Then, despite their violent protests, they were politely arrested and disarmed. The prisoners were given brandy and cigarettes and held in separate rooms. Spurred on by Klaus over the telephone, officers sent troops to occupy the key points around Vienna, including post offices, railway stations and radio transmitters. The army had also assumed control of the police force. Soon, all measures had been taken. The conspirators had control of Vienna. Officers were appointed to inspect the concentration camps in the vicinity, preparatory to carrying out orders to occupy them. It was early evening, 6:28 p.m, when the radio program was interrupted for a special announcement.
Wir unterbrechen diese Sendung aufgrund
The
einer
conspirators were
wichtigen
thrilled,
Ankündigung.
expecting to hear their own broadcast.
Deutsche Patrioten.
Instead,
Unser geliebter
the announcer
Führer wurde
told
in
Germany
seinem
that there
Haus
had been
in
a
der
bomb
Wolfschanze
attack on the
brutal
Führer,
angegriffen.
but he had survived.
Eine
A few
Bombenexplosion
minor
hat ihn
burns
nicht
and
getötet.
contusions, but he was already back to his
Ist
duties.
bereits zu seinen
In
Pflichten
fact,
zurückgekehrt
he would
und
address the
wird sich
nation later
später
that
heute
night.
Abend an Sie alle wenden.
The announcement was repeated every few minutes throughout the evening.
Deutsche Patrioten.
It also listed those who were injured, including Colonel Brunt, who had been the one that moved the briefcase bomb at the last moment, giving detailed information as to who had been injured and who had not, had the ring of truth.
Unser geliebter Führer wurde in seinem Haus eine Bombenexplosion
Outside the propaganda ministry, Major Otto Ernst Remer was not sure who to believe. The conspirators had masked their intentions by claiming that the SS was staging a coup against the lawful government. They had sent Remer to arrest Goebbels. For this to make sense, Goebbels must be a traitor to the Nazi regime. Between 7 and 8 o'clock, he reached Goebbels' apartment. He took a platoon of soldiers whom he ordered to wait outside. If he did not emerge in 15 minutes, they were to come in and get him. He released the safety catch of his pistol and strode into the building. When Remer told Goebbels his business, Goebbels told him that the Führer was not dead and that he had talked to the Führer just a few minutes earlier. "Are you a National Socialist?" Goebbels asked. "Yes, very much so," came the answer. Remer then wanted to know the truth of what had happened to the Führer. A telephone call was put through to the Führer. After explaining the situation, Goebbels handed the receiver to Remer.
Do you recognize me, Major Remer?
Hitler asked.
Do you recognize my voice?
Remer did. Not only was Hitler's voice well known across Germany, but he had received a decoration from Hitler that year and spent an hour talking with him. Hitler assured Remer that he was completely unharmed and said,
Major Remer, I confer on you full powers to put down this insurrection. You will have full power over all the generals and field marshals. You are responsible for the safety of Berlin, of the Reich.
Hitler delivered a flood of orders to Remer. He was to take his troops to the Bendler Block and command all the other troops approaching Berlin to turn back. He was to deploy troops in order to secure the ministries and had the freedom to deal with any resistance. Hitler looked forward to Remer's success. Remer was swept with emotion at being given such an important task from the Führer directly. Sent to arrest Goebbels and seal the victory of the conspirators, he now took charge of their defeat. 2 further attempts were made to have Goebbels arrested. Each time the arresting officers were confronted by troops guarding the propaganda minister's residence, and Remer asserting authority direct from the Führer. And each time the arresting officers joined Remer in putting down the rebellion. By this time, several Valkyrie formations had reached the city. The tank battalions were in position in the Tiergarten. Several key buildings had been seized. But like an avalanche, rumours were spreading that Hitler had survived. The broadcast reports of Hitler's survival emphasised that the conspirators did not control the radio stations. Some commanders, even those who were party to the coup, were not sure who to obey. Some time after 8 o'clock, a furious Field Marshal von Witzleben, in full dress uniform and carrying his baton, swept into the Bendler Block with his aide. He stormed up to Stauffenberg and Beck. Discussion quickly grew heated. Witzleben banged his fist on the table. Klaus tried to tell Witzleben that Hitler was dead, but he wasn't having it. He was angry that orders had gone out in his name without his approval, but mostly that the assassination had failed and the radio stations were not in their hands. These are the preconditions of success. Witzleben was exasperated with the young officers, thinking they had squandered the opportunity. He failed to see the point in issuing orders if he could not depend on the troops to obey. After the fiery meeting, he bellowed for his driver and stalked down the steps and out into the darkness.
Heute wird Club politische Soldaten. Unser politischer Auftrag lautet Sicherung.
About 9 o'clock, on Rehmer's orders, the troops around the government quarter began to pack up their equipment and leave. The roadblocks were withdrawn. Traffic began to move freely again. The coup leaders sent Gusevius to police headquarters. As he was leaving the Bendler block, Olbricht told him, "The Guards regiment is marching up to protect us. Tell Heldorf about it, please." Gusevius saw troops marching as he was driven to police headquarters and assumed this was the regiment Olbricht was talking about. But when he saw other troops used for the city lockdown forming ranks and leaving, he wasn't so sure. When Gusevius reached police headquarters, Heldorf was on the phone with General von Haase. Haase had received a request from Rehmer to come to Goebbels' apartment. Having heard that Himmler, the newly appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Home Army, was on his way to Berlin from the Wolfslair, Haase asked Heldorf to use his police to intercept the Reichsfuhrer SS when he landed in Berlin. Once off the phone, Heldorf scoffed to Gusevius. "When the field marshals have bungled and the generals no longer hold sway over their majors, a police officer can't make any difference." He encouraged Gusevius to flee and save his own skin. Heldorf planned to deny everything and pretend nothing had happened. He said, "For years these generals have shitted all over us. They promised us everything, but they have kept not one of their promises. What happened today is right in line with the rest. More of their shit. It was shit. All shit." Gusevius left Heldorf, a man consumed with doom, and headed back to the Bendler block. But he was turned away by Grossdeutschland guards when he tried to get near. They had all the approaches blocked. He managed to escape their dragnet and went into hiding. Pretending that he had nothing to fear, Haase obeyed the summons to attend Goebbels' apartment. He was greeted by the Reichsminister, and they discussed the day's events. Haase was affability personified and attempted to divert suspicions away from him. When Goebbels asked Haase to stay, the general requested some dinner, which was ordered. As soon as Haase left the office, Goebbels mocked him to Rehmer. His ruse had failed. After 9 o'clock, some of the officers in Home Army headquarters who had not been party to the conspiracy began to realise they were swept up in a coup. They demanded a meeting with Olbricht. He did not take them into his confidence. Rather, he ordered them to arm themselves with weapons soon to arrive by lorry and to make ready to protect the building. They left him, still uncertain. In the face of repeated radio announcements from the Wolfslair, it became increasingly implausible for the conspirators to assert that Hitler was dead. Even Klaus was heard to acknowledge the possibility of Hitler's survival, but it did not change things. The machinery for the coup had been put in motion, and there was no telling whether it would succeed. As evening wore on, the tide began to recede ever more decisively for the coup leaders. More and more officers equivocated about obeying the Bendler block orders, or asked for more information, or tried to cover their tracks, or openly changed sides. So keen did some units become to show their loyalty, they almost opened fire on other units who had already defected from the revolt. The password, "Hitler, for or against him," rang through the Berlin streets. The officers commanding the tank units presented themselves to Goebbels' apartment and placed themselves at the service of the Führer. Late that night, Klaus rang Vienna and spoke to the officers there. When he was told they had just heard from Keitel that Hitler had survived and that the orders from Berlin were to be cancelled, Klaus said, "You don't want to climb out now, do you?" In the end, only the inner circle of conspirators remained firm. Outside the Bendler block, the officers sent by Olbricht to guard the building waited for the promised weapons to arrive. It was dawning on them that they were swept up in something not of their making. They agreed they could not forswear their oath of loyalty to the Führer. When the lorries carrying the promised weapons arrived, these men armed themselves as ordered. Except now, they determined to use them to put an end to the uncertainty. Bedecked with submachine guns and hand grenades, they clumped along the corridors towards Olbricht's room, calling other officers to join them. At length, they confronted Olbricht, their commanding officer. They tried various questions, but Olbricht was evasive. They demanded to see Fromm. Olbricht offered to take them to Höppner. Finally, they demanded to know, Hitler, for or against him? Olbricht did not answer. Just then, Klaus came into the room. "Get him!" shouted one of the officers. Klaus dashed off through intervening rooms and came out into a corridor. One of the officers fired, striking him in the left shoulder. Klaus was kicked forward by the blow. He left a large pool of blood on the floor. He dragged himself up and staggered forward into the anteroom to Fromm's office, which he locked. The secretary stared in horror at the chief of staff trailing blood. He told her to dial Paris. While loyal officers pounded at the door, the call was put through. Klaus told Paris that the automatons were at the door about to get him. It was all over. He replaced the receiver, sighed deeply and said, "They've all left me in the lurch." The officers burst in on him, weapons brandished. He slowly pulled off his eye patch. A final gesture of defeat. Treason is written and narrated by me, Brian Walters. Script editing, original music, sound design and editing is by Sam Loy. You can learn more about Claus von Stauffenberg and the German resistance movement with the book Treason, available through Apple Books or the website brianwaltersauthor.com. You can find a link in the episode's show notes. Thanks for listening. All the very best, and may you find the inspiration you need in your life.